We've discussed already the nature of provisional responses, particularly how they just report progress and how they're not at all conclusive. In this module, we'll look at responses that are conclusive. In fact, by the time we're done, you should be able to identify and define a final response. Now, after receiving a request, a user agent server may well send back one or more provisional responses to report the request has been delivered reliably and perhaps that the phone is ringing. Remember, these are just updates that report progress. Sometime after, the downstream user agent will have done all that it can do to fulfill the request and will have something conclusive to report, perhaps positive, perhaps not. At this point, it issues some kind of final response, which, by definition, declares the transaction is concluded. It tells the upstream client that the request has been fulfilled to the best of the downstream user agent's ability, perhaps successfully, perhaps not. A final response is defined as any response that begins with a 2 or above, including the 200 OK that reports the request is concluded successfully, and including the 400, 500 and 600 response families that all report some kind of request failure. There's also the 300 response that, whilst not an outright failure, does not in itself report success. More on the 300s later. The key point with final responses is that they all report the user agent server is done with the request, that the request transaction is concluded. So, final responses, we've learned that any response beginning with 200 or above is a final response. Final responses report the user agent server has done everything it can to fulfill the request, perhaps a success or perhaps a failure. Lastly, a final response concludes a transaction.